whether it's clipping into a line on Everest and double checking your knot or double checking that everything's secure. It's that type of mindset, I think, that's really helped me stay alive in the outdoors.
Man of Mastery, episode 30 with Laval St.Germain. Hey, welcome back, everybody. We're about a week away from Thanksgiving, and I've got a special episode coming up next week on gratitude. But in advance of that, I just wanted to say a quick thank you again for the support and for being here and for the feedback. I super appreciate it, and I really value your time. Today with Laval St.Germain, we've got a really special, accomplished individual to speak to. He's a father, husband, and at maybe one end of the risk spectrum, an airline pilot, commercial airline pilot. But at the other end of the spectrum, he is an extreme athlete. He's an extreme mountaineering guru. He's a cyclist. He's an ultramarathoner. He's rode the Atlantic solo, and we're going to talk about all that today. But before we jump in, a couple quick housekeeping pieces of business. So one is Relentless Envy, Relentless Martha's Vineyard. I mentioned it last week. So this is an event that takes place this coming summer. It's an annual event. This will be the second annual in Martha's Vineyard. And it was recommended to me by a guest a few weeks ago, Patrick Sweeney, the fear guru. He and Laval St.Germain both spoke there as keynote VIP guests last year, and both can't say enough good things. So Laval, in today's episode, he mentioned it. I asked him about it, and again, he reiterated the recommendation. And at the time, I said I'll take a look at the dates. I've since committed, and I'm going to attend with my family, and it does look like a really special, unique, intimate kind of not only setting, but format to the way that the participants and the VIP guests and speakers get to interact over the course of 2 days and 3 nights. So Relentless MV, I will put, let's see, in this episode's show notes, I'll put the link to Relentless MV. Show notes you can find for this episode at the website manofmastery.com/030 for episode 30. manofmastery.com/030. It will have links to Relentless MV, to today's guest, and where to find Laval St.Germain. And I'm also going to throw a link in there for something else I want to mention today. It's something I created early on when we started this journey 6 months or so ago with Man of Mastery. And you can still find it on my website, but I just want to bring it up again for anybody who might be interested. It's something I call it a 7-day challenge. And it's literally 1 minute of your day for 7 days, or 1 minute of some physical activity and then some follow-up around it. And that may sound a little cheesy, but it's actually something that you can gain insight from, and you can scale it and you can extend it, and it can be more than a minute. But the structure to it is set up in such a way that by just doing something really simple, and it may not be all that easy physically, but something simple that is going to give you some real insight and some real perspective, a witness, if you want to call it that, into your own thought process when you're facing something that's a little uncertain and a little hard. So I just want to re-raise that for awareness and get you guys to give it a try. Give me some feedback on it and what you think and what kind of insight and what value you might get out of it. So again, I call it my 7-day challenge. It's a really simple starting place, and I'd like to invite you to give it a try. Again, check the website and particularly the show notes for this episode to find a link to it, the 7-day challenge. Okay, so as we jump in with Laval here, there's so much interesting stuff. The obvious one being his risk management, attention to detail and discipline and procedural rigidness that he follows, that he learned as an airline pilot, and the opposite of that, or the deviation from that he calls procedural drift. So we talk about that. I thought was super interesting. We talk about situational awareness. We talk about imposter syndrome, which in a way maybe is one of the things that keeps him humble and keeps him safe as he goes out to do these kind of things. We talk about delayed gratification, that practice of misfortune, the learning through failure, and the importance of getting outside of one's comfort zones, especially with kids these days, and pushing them into new things, particularly in the outdoors and sort of off the phones and off the electronics. I mean, one of the things that Laval is really he really emphasized is the number one thing is to take action and take action every day. So we do talk about that. We talk about his morning routine, and then just one of the quotes that he brought up that I think is just awesome, and it goes back to doing those small things and the procedures and the discipline. For lack of a nail, the shoe was lost. For lack of a shoe, the horse was lost. For lack of a horse, the rider was lost. And for lack of a rider, the war was lost. So I think that's a great way to frame up Laval's philosophy and his mindset and his approach to getting out and building on lots of little things and the momentum to do some incredibly big things. So let's tune in and hear about it from Laval St.Germain. Okay, hey, this morning I am super pleased to have Laval St.Germain. Laval, good morning.
Good morning, Michael. I almost said Mike.
Yeah, no worries. Like I said, I'll answer to anything. Just a quick, I'll introduce you here, and I'm not even quite sure where to jump in with a guy who has rode solo across the Atlantic in 53 days, skied across a minefield in Iraq, first Canadian to summit Everest without oxygen. And maybe where I'll start is a bit of fact checking. At one point I saw that you had taken down 6 of the 7 peaks. Is it now 7? Have you completed that?
Yeah, I was fortunate. New Year's Eve, 2019. So I guess just under a year ago, I summited the highest mountain in Antarctica. So that made 7. So I've done those 7 summits now.
Congratulations. That's incredible. Yeah, you and I actually, so we got hooked up through what I'll call a mutual friend, Patrick Sweeney. You know, one of the other places you and I were kicking off, and one of the things that really I found fascinating when Patrick introduced me to your name and your story as an adventurer. So I have a bit of a professional background in the commodities space, which financially is about risk management, and you're a pilot. So we'll talk a bit about how you became a pilot as a young man to really literally get a ticket to see the world. But tell me a little bit more about what being a pilot means as you go out and you adventure and you do some of these incredible things. That's your risk management basis for how you approach everything, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. I'm an airline captain here in Canada, and funny enough, I'm actually wearing my uniform now because I fly. I have to go to the airport in about an hour, so it's pretty appropriate to be speaking about it.
Love it.
And yeah, I mean, aviation is interesting. First of all, it's kind of the only job I've ever done. I got into it very, very young, and so for me, this is just the way I operate. But we follow procedures, we follow checklists, and we are always thinking about what's the next thing that can get us. So if you take that type of mindset and that type of thinking into all aspects of your life, whether it's health and fitness or whether it's clipping onto a fixed line high on Everest, it can, I think it's just a value added for sure. One thing we do in aviation, which I just touched on earlier, is procedures. We follow procedures, even though I have flown this aircraft to the 737 for over 15, actually 17 years. I know the thing as well as I know my own vehicle or riding my bike or walking down the street. We still stick to checklists. We never sort of freelance or go off on our own, even though we could do an entire mission, meaning from startup to takeoff to landing and taxiing and never touch a checklist. We never do that. So I think that discipline and that adherence to procedures really helps. So when you bring that into the outdoor world, it's things like if I'm in my ocean rowing boat going across the North Atlantic, and I want to reach out and grab something that's on the deck and I don't have my safety line on, I think, I can just grab that quickly and I'll be fine. I won't do it. So we call that procedural drifts, which is sort of appropriate when you think about being in a boat. But if I were to do that and a wave would suddenly wash over the boat, I'd be gone. My wife and my kids would never know what happened to me. So whether it's clipping into a line on Everest and double checking your knot or double checking that everything's secure, it's that type of mindset, I think, that's really helped me stay alive in the outdoors.
Nice. So that discipline, does that apply in things, for example, I mean, nothing like Everest, but my son and wife and I were hiking up a mountain a couple weekends ago and we got to the top and my wife took a deep breath. And I mentioned to my son, they say the hardest part is the descent, right? Mm-hmm. When you get to the top, you're only halfway there. And I know I've read about some of the disciplines that go into summiting these peaks like Everest, that you've got cutoff times, for an example. And if you stick to procedure, the book says you hit that cutoff time, you turn back no matter what. Is that kind of the type of stuff?
Yeah, that'll be the same type of thing. Just decision making and risk mitigation. I mean, I wasn't even close to my cutoff time when I summited Everest, fortunately, so that wasn't an issue. But when I got to the top, I summited with a British buddy of mine, and when we got up there, I looked over at him, Mark, and I said, "Mark, 20 minutes, not a second longer. We got to get down," because I knew that the most dangerous and toughest part of summiting Everest without oxygen is the descent. So yeah, sticking to that type of rigid procedural following is, I think, super important. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still enjoy life, and I'm not living by a checklist every day, but I think it's important to sort of in the morning wake up, kind of write out your own checklist of what you want to do, what makes a good day. We all know what makes a good day, and follow that. And it's worked for me.
Yeah, yeah, and actually, I'm glad you brought that up. I want to touch on that before at some point here on kind of morning routine and evening routine. But so let me ask. I mentioned Stephen Venable's name for a couple reasons. So one, I had a chance to meet the gentleman quite some years ago, and he took his shoe off to show me the three toes he'd lost partially to frostbite at Everest. And his story. So he set a new route up the mountain, four-man team, and one turned back with altitude sickness, and I think Stephen climbed to the summit, maybe ahead or stronger or faster than a couple of his other teammates who did time out and turn back, and I believe Stephen went beyond their cutoff. He did summit, but he was caught in a storm coming down and had to bivouac, and I think
That's right.
barely
Yep.
survived the night. And that's how he lost a few toes. But I read that you lost a few fingers to frostbite as well. So was that anything to do with procedure or deviating, or just something that happened?
Yeah, it's funny. People are always saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry. It must have been really cold on Everest." Well, I guess it's all relative. As a Canadian who spends a lot of time in the Arctic, it wasn't cold at all. It was maybe around minus 30 degrees Celsius. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but the reason I lost my fingers is I had these big Himalayan expedition mitts on, and I had a climbing device that we call that a Jumar, and it's a friction device that slides up the rope but won't slide backwards.
Uh-huh. Yep.
And the mitts were too big for the opening in it, so it compressed it down around my fingers. And about 3 hours out of high camp, I froze three fingers. And once they're frozen, it's no big deal. It's just like having wooden fingers. But I had them amputated about a month and a half later back in Canada, and that was strictly because of missing that small detail. I don't know, Michael, if you've ever heard of that saying that it talks about sweating the small stuff, and I don't know who made the quote, but it's, for lack of a nail, the shoe was lost. For lack of a shoe, the horse was lost. For lack of the horse, the rider was lost. And for lack of the rider, the war was lost. So that shows you how one tiny detail can cascade and cause these issues. So something at base camp on Everest is as innocuous as a tight fitting Jumar handle results in me losing three fingers on summit day. So we sweat the small details, the small stuff, when we're both in aviation and when you're doing these types of trips.
That's amazing. Yeah. So a Jumar that's a bit too small or a mitt that's a bit too big.
Yep.
It really is
Yep.
those small
And,
things.
and I've done the same cycling in the Canadian Arctic in the wintertime. I did this cycling trip in the Arctic on a fat bike, and took me 2 attempts to do it, because the first time I froze one of my toes, my right big toe, and I just about lost it. And that was because I tried to go with sort of my own version of a extreme cold weather cycling boot with SPD pedals that you
Yep.
click in, your cycling shoe clicks into the pedal, but that metal interface between the boot and your pedal just sucked the heat out of my boot. And it was minus 46 degrees, which is the same in Celsius. 46 in Fahrenheit is the same, but I froze a toe and just about lost it. So I went back the next year with the proper equipment and did it. So yeah, you learn from your errors for sure.
It really is those little things that cascade. Yeah, I was going to mention that the Celsius and Fahrenheit scales, they cross somewhere there. I learned
Yeah.
either in my time going to school in Michigan or the time I spent working in Toronto, one or the other. Although it is a it is a very, very cold 62 Fahrenheit or so in California today. No, I actually read another quote yesterday that was it's very similar in that cascading effect sort of concept, but more in mindset, and it's along the lines of your thoughts become your words become your actions, which become your habits, which become your character, which determine your destiny. Preparation, I think I've heard you mention, breeds confidence in the things that you're doing, whether it's work wise, whether it's adventure wise. But I've also heard you say that despite doing some of these things, including setting records, which I know that's not why you've embarked on them, but you've mentioned imposter syndrome, which Patrick and I also spoke about a bit. Do you still feel that way, or what
Oh,
do you
for
relate that
sure.
to? Yeah.
For sure. I don't know. I don't know if it's being the modest Canadian or what it is, but yeah, when I'm let's say I'm at a speaking gig with a bunch of world-class speakers and I'm looking around going, what am I doing here? Or I step on the stage with 500 people in the crowd to do a speaking gig. And I'm like, what's so interesting about me? And I think that's, I don't mind that. I don't mind having that imposter syndrome. I think it keeps you sharp. And it's like when you talked about being in a Spartan race. When you start, I've raced ultra marathons and adventure racing and that type of thing. When you get to the start line, you always look around at everybody and you think, okay, that guy's going to beat me. I'm going to beat that guy. That guy's fitter than me. I can't believe how fit that guy is. And then it all shakes out in the end. And sometimes it works. But at the same time, you're thinking, I shouldn't be here.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. My wife and I just had this chat with our 11-year-old son. So there's a Spartan kids race as well, and he qualified last year for the Kids World Championship. And you
Wow.
qualify by making a podium at least once in a year. So he qualified last year, and he usually attacks every race with some real confidence and drive. You'll always see him in the front line of the kids ready to sprint out of the gate. Except when he got to this World Championship, he just sunk into the background, like five rows deep of kids, like looking up at these taller boys around him, and he got crushed, and he realizes that he completely took himself out of the race with his confidence. He lost it before he even started. So he's qualified again this year. It's coming up early next month, and he just did a video that he submitted to Spartan yesterday where he actually uses those words. He says, last year I got crushed. I've come back this year training harder than ever. So he's taken a bit of defeat there, and he's fueling it and using that to work on his confidence for the next time out.
Yeah, great lessons, and I think that's important for kids, especially. We live in a world now that's for some reason we don't want our kids to ever experience any type of hardship, or we don't want them to ever feel failure. I don't know if it's the same in the U.S., but I know that when my youngest son Eric, who just turned 18, was playing soccer, that they weren't displaying the score at some games because they didn't want a winner or a loser, and that's not the way life is at all. And I think it's important, number one, that kids experience discomfort, that they experience challenge, and that they understand that failure is part of it. That's the only way you learn. So
Exactly the way you learn. Yeah, I think you've called it the practice of misfortune.
yeah.
The things that make you better as a person, as a boy, as a man, as a parent. Well, I know a lot of people ask you, Laval, why you go on these adventures, and that's a hard one to answer. But maybe I'll ask it a little bit of a different way. So when you are out there and you're in the middle of a climb or a row or a cycle, do you have a why that brings you home and brings you home safely?
A why that brings me home. I've got a goal to walk in the door and hug Janet and the kids, and that's an incredibly strong pull. But I think that's a strong pull with anybody, whether you're you know I don't think that is anything that's unusual. But when people ask me why I do it, it's not to try and be pithy or cheeky, but it's I just can't think of why I wouldn't want to do it. Why don't you want to be out there in the elements? Why don't you want to set a big goal? These are simple goals. They're big, but they're simple. I mean, getting to the pile of a really high, or the top of a really high pile of rocks is super simple. Crossing an ocean is super simple. It's a simple goal. It's challenging to accomplish, but it's a really simple thing to get there. And when you think about it in the purest sense, and when you get out there and you start moving, the lead up to it is very difficult. These trips, it's the logistics, it's the fundraising, it's the knowing, the feeling of saying goodbye to the family, which is the most horrible thing. But once you get moving, once you get out there, there's something that is just it's such a high to dream up something, to write down how you're going to do it, and to actually pull it off is there's nothing like it. It's, to me, it's the best drug in the world.
Yeah, that's amazing. I actually had written down a question yesterday that I was going to start to ask you about. I think you've mentioned the importance of tribe,
Yeah.
or I'll say team. And I was going to ask you about how that related to solo adventures. And then I heard you talk about, for example, your row across the Atlantic. By no means was that a solo effort. It was one man in a boat rowing, but you had a whole team behind you, I believe.
Yeah, and the impetus for the row was sort of to take you on a bit of a journey, was the fact that that I've been always doing these trips, coming back with great photos and stories and videos and yeah, just stuff for myself. And then a really close friend at age 40 was diagnosed with fairly serious cancer. Fortunately, Corey is still with us and healthy, and but he still has this very poor diagnosis. And when he told me about it, I felt it must have been like if I took you down to the dock in Halifax, Nova Scotia at 5:45 in the morning, Michael, and said, "There's your boat. You're going to row 5,500 kilometers to France. There's your oar. Have a nice trip without any training, without any preparation, and kick off, and you're on your own." And I think the cancer journey is probably like that, where you are, you're suffering the nausea of chemo, just like you're suffering from seasickness. Obviously, cancer is far worse than a guy in a solo rowboat. And even though you're surrounded by doctors and nurses and friends and family, you're still battling that on your own. And on an ocean row, I decided to use the ocean row as a way to get some notoriety and some attention and raise money for a cancer hospital in the city that I live in, because I thought in some small way that being alone on that boat was probably similar to the sudden feeling of being given that diagnosis by a doctor. But I was surrounded electronically, I guess you'd say. I had satellite comms, or my friends and family could see exactly where I was. I could talk on the phone with Janet if I wanted to, even though I only called her once during the trip, but it was all satellite emails and texts. And that group of people around me, I think, it really helped me get across in the end. And I think it's important to have that. And I know that as a family, we've suffered tragedy. And I think really the only reason that we made it through it in as healthy a way as possible is the fact that we had a really good tribe around us, really good friends, and supportive family for sure.
Yeah, one of the things I talk about is growth through adversity, and I'm a firm believer that going out and attacking these hard things in some way helps us try to prepare for things in life that are difficult. And certainly there are things that no one can really prepare for. And I was really sad to hear that you guys lost a son to a kayak drowning accident. But not only are you open about talking about that hardship, I think you also talk about the tribe that got you through it, but how as a family, in a way, you've even become better for it.
Yeah, you never want to take a tragedy like losing a kid and turn it into something positive, for sure. But we lost our son Richard. It'll be 6 years ago in July. He was canoeing up in the Northwest Territories. He's just started as a young pilot up there, and about 3 weeks after starting, he went canoeing one evening with a girl that was working up there in a local hotel. And long story short, the canoe capsized. He stayed with the canoe. She swam for shore and was rescued. And this river, it's called the Mackenzie River. It's the second biggest river in North America, so it's second to the Mississippi, and very big river. And we lost Richard. And I understand, obviously, from your previous comments that you're a parent, and as a parent, you go through your entire life dreading ever having to confront that. And we did. And we had I had the 2:30 in the morning phone call from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and changed our life. And it's far tougher than anything I've ever done, for sure. One thing I did, Michael, is that when I hung up the phone with with the constable, I just sat there for 15 minutes and made a plan about how I was going to do this, and how I was determined to come out of this healthy as a family. And we were very deliberate about that as a family. And it's yeah, there's nothing tougher. Losing a child is something that you never get over. But I think, I mean, it goes without saying that life continues, and it is, yeah, it's a far greater challenge than anything I've ever done by orders of magnitude. And you know, luckily I somehow chose the right partner in Janet, and we and the two remaining kids have survived. But it's been tough for sure. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Laval, for having the courage and the openness to talk about that. I really appreciate it, and not just to dredge it up, but to to honor Richard's memory. But also, I wanted to ask you if you were willing to share it, because my wife and I have a very close friend who their family lost a teenage boy last year.
I think it's important to realize, and I'm not trying to say that people are going to, in North America, losing a child is exceedingly rare. And let's just be clear about that, exceedingly rare. And, but I think what's important to realize, and you listen to my story and our story as a family, is that tragedy is part of life. And you're not going to go through unscathed. Your life is not going to be like an Instagram account, which is generally only the best of the best, and everything's filtered and looking good. And there's going to be tragedy. I mean, that is part of life. And there's all these cliches that where we talk about, you decide how you are going to react to things and how you're going to deal with things. And we're very deliberate. We're very deliberate about that. And I think it really helped. We understood that we're not unique, that losing a child is not something that has never occurred before. It's occurred for millennia, and it's going to continue to occur. But we had to continue moving forward. And one of the analogies I use is in my when I do my talks, is that when you're rowing an ocean rowing boat, you're always looking backwards. You're always looking at where you came from, but you're still moving forward. And it's okay to do that. You see people always saying, never look to your past, always move forward. And I think that's wrong. There's nothing wrong with looking back at your errors, nothing wrong with looking back at your mistakes, and nothing wrong with missing those that have gone before you and that you've lost. There's nothing wrong with that. I think it's really important. You're not moving away from it, but you're still moving forward, even though you're looking behind you. And I don't know. I think it's helped. And one of the reasons I felt the ocean row was good for me is that it was allowed me to go out there and suffer physically and be on my own, and somehow feel closer in a way to Richards.
Yeah, well said, Laval, and certainly keeping an eye to where we've come from. It's a journey, and that perspective is always useful. While we're on the hard stuff, let's just knock it out. So I've also heard you mention that you were estranged from your dad, kind of incommunicado for a number of years.
Yeah.
And I think that came out in a discussion about some of potentially why you do what you do. But the question I've got for you is what brought you guys back together? How did that happen?
I think time, and the fact that he suffered a pretty serious stroke. Yeah, there's just no use in holding that type of animosity anymore. Or, I mean, he is my dad, and no matter what, he gave me a lot of what I am today. And he gave me that love of reading. He gave me that love of dreaming of faraway places. He's the one who took me to the airport at age 15 and said, "You're doing your familiarization flight. You're going to get your pilot's license." And those things are key. Those the influence of a parent, and not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily have to be a parent, but anybody in a child's life that comes into that child's life can really change the trajectory of somebody's life. And that FAM flight, I remember that day, the familiarization flight. I remember I was hanging out with my friends, or I was with my girlfriend, and I didn't really want to do it. And he kind of said, "Get in the car, we're going," and it set the hook. And my dad taught me something there, that sometimes you have to push kids to try new things and to just get things done, because everybody just wants the comfort. They don't want to not hang out with their friends nowadays. Back then there's none of this, but they didn't want to get off their phone. And there's, my kids, when Richard and Andrea were small, we rode 1,000 kilometers up an Arctic highway in the summertime. They were 11 and 13 years old, and they didn't have a choice. I just said, "We're going on this bike ride," and they didn't know anything. They said, "Oh, this sounds great." And next thing you know, they've done it at this remote Arctic gravel road, and sleeping in a tent on the side of the road. And kids are capable of this stuff, and my dad taught me that, so I'm thankful for that. So yeah, he suffered horribly physically because of the stroke, and it's sad to see for sure. But it's time to hang up the animosity.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that as well. Well, yeah, you mentioned your kids, and certainly, particularly now in an electronic society, I think we live in a world of, as you said, everything is sort of the positive. We don't talk as much about the setbacks, the failures, the challenges, the negatives. Delayed gratification is something that we don't practice as much as maybe we should. And I think one thing I've heard you say is that the number one thing is to take action, whether it's getting the kids out there on the 1,000-kilometer bike, or for somebody else it might be a much smaller step. But there's always one small step and one action, I think, that can make a very big difference, whether it's in a day or in a life.
Yeah, it's so important. And I've even forgot on previous podcasts I've talked about this, but yeah, it's, instead of sitting around thinking about it and looking at other people's social media and what they've done, just start it. One thing that Patrick Sweeney posted the other day, one of your previous podcast guests and a friend of mine, was about procrastination as a type of fear. And I'd never heard it mentioned like that. And I thought, wow, like, don't tell Patrick I thought this was such a great quote, but I thought it was so appropriate, that so accurate, that procrastination really is just a fear. You're procrastinating to put your shoes on and go for a run. You're procrastinating to go to the gym. I'll do that later. You're procrastinating to take that big trip. You're procrastinating to lose that weight. You're procrastinating to take your wife on a date, or whatever it may be. But you know what I've learned, and I think what we all learn, is that life is exceedingly short, and you don't know how long you're going to have the capability, whether physically, financially, or personally, to do this stuff. So you got to get moving. You got to start now. And life is just short. I mean, it seems like yesterday I had my 30th birthday. Well, I just passed my 51st birthday, and it didn't seem like it took that long, and it doesn't seem like I did that much in between. And you gotta stay at it.
Yeah, blink of an eye, right? Well, maybe
Yeah.
I've fed Patrick's ego a bit, because I loved that post as well, and I reshared it. But to me, it was spot on. And I've heard people procrastinate. eh, Fear makes us rationalize, and I've heard people rationalize. Well, I could never do what you did, or I could never do what Laval did. But to me, that's the wrong way to approach it. You can only compare yourself to yourself, and so whatever that relative spectrum is, yeah, you take that first step. Or people sort of say, maybe it goes back to that imposter syndrome. And I'll dredge up another older quote from you that said, experimentation is an act in humility. So no matter what our relative impossibility is, you go out there and start taking steps towards it. It has a real way of humbling and teaching each of us wherever we are on that first step.
Yeah, I agree. And your comment about rationalization, everybody builds a narrative to not do something. It's the old story where you're trying to, let's say you're trying to to do intermittent fasting, for example, or to do a keto-ish type lifestyle, and you see that fresh, Montreal bagel sitting there, and you build a story that, well, I'll be running stairs later today, or I'm going to do a long bike ride, or I worked out really hard at the gym. That'll be fine. And we always build these stories, these narratives, and this rationale to let us cheat in a way. And it's okay every once in a while for sure, but you can't let that take over your life. You have to maintain some type of chronic level of discomfort, I think, meaning that you need to restrict yourself in life, or you're just gonna you're gonna be a quivering mass of jelly and never get anything done. And that chronic the chronic baseline level of restriction and discomfort, I think personally is very important.
100%. Yeah, I'm with you on that. One of the things I've realized in kind of checking in with myself is that for me is one step, right? The conscious recognition of I have a choice here of that bagel or whatever it is. The other one that I've struggled with is sort of I call it my subconscious sort of rationalization or flight from fear. So I had a 12-hour boot camp event that I was registered for back in July. And man, this thing scared the hell out of me going into it. And I had all kinds of conscious rationalizations trying to talk myself out of it. And I finally just go like, hey, look, Michael, you're doing this thing, period. So like hang it up, right? And then I found myself making poor decisions in those couple weeks leading up to it, and injuring myself. Like I knew I shouldn't have gone out and played indoor soccer the Wednesday before, and I go out there and I pull a groin. Or I'm working in the backyard with my son and I jump barefoot off a 6-foot wall on the concrete and like destroy both my feet. Like I was just making bad decisions to convince
That's
myself
called
that
being a
I'd injured
guy. That's called
myself.
just being a guy, just dumb.
Yeah, true. I make those decisions year round.
Yeah.
No doubt about it.
That subconscious thing, you got to keep an eye on that, and you have to always question your theory of situation, which is something we use in aviation. So we always have to have situational awareness. So when you're operating an aircraft and you're in cloud, first of all, you've got no reference to anything. It's just like flying in a glass of milk, and you have to always have what we call SA, situational awareness. You have to know exactly where you are three-dimensionally, where you are above the terrain, where you are speed wise. You have to control the velocity of the aircraft, the deceleration of it. You're trying to fly it efficiently, and you have to keep questioning your theory of where you are, because you start to build a theory of where you are in the sky three-dimensionally, and you use all your instruments, you use all your tools to always double check that. And I think that's important that we do that. You have to constantly reevaluate where you think you are, be it in your life or in this example, in an aircraft on the approach, for example.
So since you took it to the aircraft and the flying metaphor, the thing that made me think of it when you said 360-degree awareness. So in hindsight, I think the scariest flight I've ever been on was not a first world flight. It was in Nepal from Jomsom to Pokhara, and like that if you've been on that one, it gets canceled daily, and there's only a short window based on the winds, and you fly through a canyon and there's cloud cover and planes zipping by you on the two-way street going the other direction. That one was a bit scary.
Yeah, there's Nepal is infamous for accidents for sure, and Indonesia and places like that. I mean, one time I was flying on an airline in Indonesia going deep into the jungle, and I used my airline cred to get in the jump seats. I could keep an eye on the guys.
Yeah.
Because we're going into this remote mountainous airport. And I really did, through clouds of cigarette smoke as they smoked the entire flight, I kept an eye on
them. Brilliant. Well, I've had people ask, what's your favorite place in the world? And it's such a tough question. I mean, Nepal is one of my favorite places. Surprisingly, to me, Paris is one of my favorite places. So let me ask you a little differently. What makes a place or an adventure or somewhere you go special to you or stand out for you?
That's so tough. I mean, a spectacular mountain vista is pretty hard to beat, but at the same time, I've had great times in Oklahoma City and in Roswell, New Mexico, and in little podunk towns all over the U.S. or remote places in Canada, and those I think are because when I get to some place, I'm always excited to be there. And I will do so much research on that place so that I know exactly where I'm going to run, what I want to see. And then to make it even better, it's when you travel, I think you always emanate vulnerability. So in that way, it's easier to meet people and to talk to people. And some of the people I've met on these trips have made even though in the worst places spectacular. So I don't have one favorite place in the world. I've got some, and I've seen a lot of the world. I've seen some pretty unbelievably spectacular places, but I don't have one favorite. And it's people always ask me that, but there's not one. I just enjoy. I am a real travel bug. I love travel. I love seeing new things. And yeah, I mean, running down the Seine in Paris is spectacular. Running the stairs directly across from the Eiffel Tower and early in the morning when there's people skateboarding down there, it's awesome. Running the stairs in Kathmandu up to the Monkey Temple early in the morning is like nothing else. Or sitting in a cafe in Portugal with my wife. It all depends. Like I don't have one favorite.
Yeah, there you go.
I don't necessarily like Vegas, but I certainly like the area around Vegas, the desert, Death Valley, Red Rocks, incredible. The city, no thanks. But once again, it's all based on what you do and what you make of these places.
Yeah, there you go. I have a friend of mine from Vancouver or who lives in Vancouver would call your approach playful curiosity. And
Yeah,
I
great
completely
term.
agree. I think my take for myself or my answer is it's all about the people that make the experience and make the
Yeah,
place.
as long as you're with other people, but sometimes I'm not.
Well, then hopefully you enjoy your own company.
Yeah, sometimes, yeah.
I know, we don't have a ton of time left here, so maybe hit a couple things quickly. I mentioned early on I wanted to ask you about what your typical day looks like, or you may not have a typical day, but morning routine, evening routine, and in particular, you travel like crazy, especially with your pilot's job.
Hmm.
And I and a lot of friends quite often travel for work. So do you have a good routine to try to keep things consistent, especially when you're on the road?
I do something every day physically, whether it's run, ride, work out at the gym, or I do multiple things every day. That's just not even that's like brushing my teeth. It's not even negotiable. And I really try and eat healthy. Like I just really try and look after myself. And I've heard people so many times say how difficult it is to stay healthy on the road. I don't think it's difficult at all. I think it's far easier than when you're at home. I mean, when you're at home, you've always got the refrigerator door right there to crank open when you're bored, when you're working on something and you close your laptop and walk over and have a bite to eat, or you're watching something on TV and between periods in the hockey game, you go and grab something to eat. I mean, yeah, I don't buy that. And I think that on the road is the best. It's the best for that type of stuff because you're always in a new city. You can explore it. There's a real impetus to get outside and see what this town's about or this place wherever you are. And I just don't go anywhere without my gear. So whether I'm renting a bike in a city that I'm in, whether I'm bringing a bike, running gear, workout gear, whatever, I think it's real simple. But at home, we watch. My wife is very fitness oriented, and so am I, obviously. And we know we're very careful about what we eat. Not a lot of carbs. At the same time, though, we love going out for a beautiful dinner with friends, and you'll see me sometimes eating some good sourdough and but I cycle to work every day, and no matter what the weather, and then I work out at the gym, and I think that's just so important. Is doing something every day. We're made to move, and I don't do any cardio indoors at all. Zero. All my cardio is done outdoors, and I've heard especially Americans marvel at the fact that even in the wintertime, but there, there's that old Scandinavian saying, there's no bad weather, just bad clothing. And if you've got the
I
right
like it.
gear, if you got the right gear, you can handle it. So it's, there's no excuse to not stay active.
I like it. Yeah, our friend Patrick Sweeney, he definitely chastised me a bit for having an indoor rowing machine. He's going like, "What's going on here? You live in Southern California. Get out there on the bay and row."
Yeah,
Well,
that's right.
I love your approach. It's incredible. What's next for you? What's next in terms of audacious goals of your charity endeavors, your speaking, and make sure we know where people can find you and get in touch and keep track of what you're doing.
Yeah, so the next goals are kind of top secret. I don't know I'm going to let them out until it's all done and like figured out. And one of them is in a hot spot in the world that's dangerous. So I don't want to let it out yet, but I'm working on it right now, and I'll let you know for sure when I've got it all put together. But I've got a couple I'm working on right now for sure, and one major expedition and then one very unusual expedition, and it all depends on what I can do with work with respect to time off and that type of thing, and then convincing Janet. But yeah, I've got a couple that are in the hopper, so to speak. If people want to follow me or have me speak, I think just go to my website. It's just lavalstgermain.com, LavalStGermain.com, or at Laval St.Germain on Twitter or Instagram, and they can reach out there. But yeah, that's how you find me, and keep an eye on what I'm doing.
Okay, perfect. And I'll make sure to put links to all that in the show notes for this episode. Dangerous places. Wonder where you're going next. Could be like Washington, D.C. That seems like one of the most dangerous places in the world.
Yeah, this is the guy who skied in Iraq, so we'll see.
Right. Yeah, I'm not sure where you go from there. Relentless Envy. I know you spoke there last year, and Patrick highly recommended it. I'm really interested. I know we're not going to make it there this year because of a conflicting trip, but are you speaking or appearing there again this year?
Yeah, unless I'm on a trip, but one of my trips may conflict with that. But I can't recommend that enough. Like, I didn't know anything about it because it was the first year this year, and it was an absolute mind-blowing event. So if anybody has the ability to go to the Relentless Envy website and get a ticket, it's in Martha's Vineyard at a beautiful inn. You've got all kinds of interesting speakers, from weirdos like me to more weirdos like Patrick, and it is just an unbelievable good time and very value added. I can't say enough about it. My wife and I were completely blown away. I think even if I'm on an expedition this spring and she goes, she'll go up without me for sure.
Yeah, Patrick highly recommended it. I think we might have been talking about, so Patrick and I have another person in common named Mark Devine, San Diego guy who's an ex-Navy SEAL, and he runs that SEAL Fit boot camp that scared my socks off back in July, 12 hours overnight. But he's got a 24-hour version and a 50-hour version, and I think I may jump back in again this year for another round of abuse. And I'd commented to Patrick, that's just, there's a learning experience there, but it's not the type that my wife is going to sign up for. And he says, Hey, Relentless Envy, incredible event, incredible set of personalities. And at night you can kick back in Martha's Vineyard and your wife can have a glass of wine. So I said, what? That's probably the way to go.
I can't tell you how crazy good that was. And John Kane and his wife Kaya put this event on, and it's well worth it. It's something else. You get to meet some super interesting people, very intimate. There's probably about 150 people there, and it's in a spectacular location. So check it out, Relentless Envy.
All right, I'm going to take another look at that and double check our travel schedule, see if we can make it work.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that, and Laval, sharing your story, some of the incredible stuff you've been through, the ups and downs, and really look forward to keeping an eye on what's next and following along with your adventures.
And right back at you, Michael. I'll be following along with you and seeing how you're doing, and good luck to your boy. And I really enjoyed speaking with you down in freezing cold San Diego.
Yeah, if you're ever down this way, bring your mitts and your parka, and we'll go out and do something.
Actually, what we call, you guys call it a knit ski hat, I believe. We call it a toque. So I'll bring my toque. That's a Canadian word, and that's that knit. I think you guys call it a knit ski hat or a beanie. There's a Canadian term you've learned today, a toque.
All right. Sounds good. Well, we learn something every day. I'll file that one away. And yeah, I hope we'll cross paths somewhere around the world soon. I really enjoyed it. Thank you, Laval.
Thanks, Michael.
Wow, great insight. Really super guy. I mean, I'm humbled and really, really pleased and thankful that Laval took some time to come on with us. Yeah, as you heard, he was literally sitting there in his pilot's uniform, ready to take off, and he deals not only with a hectic professional schedule as a pilot, but weather and things like that here in the winter months going into Canada. So again, thank you, Laval. Really appreciate the insight and the time you spent here with the audience today. And for myself, and if others are interested in Relentless Envy, I certainly hope that that's a place where we'll get to hear more from Laval and get to know him better. I failed to mention here at the beginning of the episode, John Kane, who is the founder and owner of Relentless MV, has set up a group discount for the Man of Mastery audience. So we've got quite a nice discount opportunity for that event for anybody who might be interested. Okay, and I'll just wrap up today with a couple reminders. If you would please follow us on Instagram, Facebook, at The Man of Mastery. We've got some interesting stuff going on there on a pretty much daily intraday basis. Facebook, there's a private group for guys over there, which is going to have some exclusive stuff, sneak previews of podcast episodes and some other hints, challenges, things like that. And then the things I mentioned in today's episode, Relentless MV, access to that discount code, where to follow Laval St.Germain and know more about his adventures. And then I even mentioned the 7-day challenge. All of that you can find in the show notes for today's episode. Again, that's at manofmastery.com/030. And lastly, again, thank you for the support so much on the podcast. If you haven't already, would you please take a couple minutes just to go out to wherever you listen to the podcast, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, so forth, and just give it a rating, give it a review. It really helps the engine, the search engine, the rankings engine to spread the word, get it out in front of other people, and help build the audience. So again, thank you so much. Have a great week. We'll see you back here next week for episode 31, Thanksgiving on Gratitude.